Welcome. It's Monday, April 15th, 2024. It's 3:31 p.m. and this is a Port of Olympia Commission work session today. We have all of our commissioners present, including Commissioner Basavada, who is joining remotely. So welcome everyone to today's meeting. We have an agenda in front of us. Is there a motion to approve today's agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of approving today's agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we have an agenda. So first up on our agenda is the Thurston Economic Development Council, Regional Agriculture Development, Aslan Mead, Director of Strategic Alliances. So Aslan, I'd say you have the floor.
Should I stand? Should I sit?
It's up to you. It's up to you.
Conversational? Yeah,
You can do whatever makes you comfortable.
you're a standard. Thanks for having me here and thanks for having us here, although it's just me, although I represent more than just me. Used to do this all the time and it's so nice to be back, really, truly, like, and all the work that I have to do this week, this is something I was actually looking forward to. And it's so new. Even our senior party members of Commissioner Isle and Harding haven't been here that long. And the staff is so new. And so I did take a little extra time to kind of share where we've been in the past. And I hope you all find value in that. And then obviously we'll be having conversations about where we go in the future. So appreciate being here. All right, let's see if I can make this thing work. Has it paused too long yet? No. All right. So just know we call it RAD because that's fun to call it, Regional Agriculture Development. Really going to focus on the Southwest Washington Agricultural Business and Innovation Park project. That's what I heard that the commission was interested in hearing about. But I also really want to talk about the food hub. I think if you don't know about it, you will be interested in that. But just know there's a lot we're doing in support of regional agriculture. I want to hit on these other two in blue just kind of quickly, just to show you. The port often was the first in on some of these projects with just small little investments that helped us get started in the beginning. And then you get to see like all the partners that came to the table and followed suit and all the work that's been done along the way. And so I just want to tell that story as we go. Do want to acknowledge that almost everything we do it with our WSU extension here locally in an organization called the Northwest Agricultural Business Center. And really, that's extraordinary at this point. And all of three of our organizations, we started with just one of us working on regional ag, sometimes almost part-time, have built up so that we now have staff underneath us. So like Tina Sharp runs our food hub initiative. I barely even focus on the food hub anymore after getting it up and running. And NABC has additional staff. And together each year we can take what we've built in the past and then use that for applying for grants, and we can tell a better story and we build year after year. And so we really are blessed in this region, and we do get interest from other parts of the state of what we're doing here. I also want to give a shout out to the Conservation District. They were here with us in some of the stuff we did in the beginning, had kind of a hiatus as they had a couple of rough years, and then they're way more back involved again. And then Pack Mountain Workforce Development Council has been just an extraordinary partner, came in right at the beginning of COVID, helped us launch the food hub in a time of crisis, and has been very engaged and a great partner along the way. But there's a lot of other partners. So want to give that. WSU Extension usually comes to this presentation with me in the past. We just couldn't get Stephen Bramwell's our WSU Extension Director, and just didn't work out for the timing today, but he wishes to be here and sends his hellos. All right, that's the one. What do I do now? Advance, please. That wasn't even that long of a pause. All right. So I'm just gonna hand these out. I don't know if I brought enough for everyone here, but you can't see that script on the board, but I want to point out, this is a letter of understanding that was created in 2019 when the Port of Chehalis was involved in regional agriculture work. We took a little trip up to the Port of Skagit to learn what they were doing. And we took the port director of Skagit, of Chehalis at that time. And he came back sold. He's gonna get involved in regional agriculture, and we were starting to develop the Ag Park project. The craft district was happening in Tumwater. And we were like, we really need some way to coordinate these projects without competing, but looking at it regionally. And we started working on a regional strategic plan for regional agriculture development. And then went out and got all these signatures and all these organizations, and we started having, for a while, we were having like meetings twice a year. And so really looking mostly Thurston, Lewis, and Grays Harbor, but you'll see there's even, statewide organizations and agencies on this. And again, when you're applying for grants, when you're coordinating, going after funding, it's really nice to be working with groups. Agriculture certainly does not follow county borders, right? I mean, that's not how food works. So moving along. I wanted to tell a little bit about the port's involvement. So it was really in 2014, there was a lot of interest from certain citizen groups that were active in the region saying the port should get involved in local agriculture. Well, what does that even mean? At that same time, we had a WSU extension director that was a real rock star, started the Cascadia Grains Conference, if any of you had heard of that, and was doing several different projects. They got some funding with a partner from Evergreen State College to do this farms to market assessment. And it was really the first local, really local, how does our local economy work in relation to local food and local agriculture? At that time, the WSU Extension Director, Lucas Patzik, worked with Port Commission and staff and actually did a field trip up to Port of Skagit at that time. The Port of Skagit is the poster child that we follow, and then really a lot around grains, which you'll hear a little bit about today. But that port has done extraordinary work in support of their regional scale agriculture, and really integrated it. So, with the actual farmers in the region selling into things like there was a malting facility, there was a grain milling facility that there still is. And then they also have the educational facilities up there, like the bread lab, and they grow different trials of grain. And the port has, done things where they have built properties or bought equipment for like say for the flour mill, and then they amortize that, and then the company built that, they built that into the company's rent or whatever. And so they were able to put that initial investment up front that then helped these businesses to grow and create this kind of ecosystem. So just going through this, after that trip, Commissioner Gunn and Lucas Patzik, the WSU Extension Director, came back and did a presentation for the rest of the commission. And it was really in the community, it was a pretty well-attended community event. And they gave these suggestions of this is what they would like to see supported in our region. And I just want to say that, when I got to the EDC in 2016, Lucas had just left the WSU Extension. There was really nobody leading these efforts anymore. And I utilized this list as this is my to-do list, right? And with our partners, I want to say that everything on this list now exists in our region. And that's pretty extraordinary. And again, it helps with grant writing. So we'll touch on almost everything in here as we go through this. So this actually directly, the commission has, starting in 2016, invested in little investments into agriculture that then built, grew over the years. So actually my position at the EDC, I came in with some support from it wasn't my entire salary by any means, but it helped my boss, Michael Cade, put together the funding to actually bring me on board. And I was brought on board specifically to go out and do an assessment of the agricultural economy, what's out there, and report back to the Port Commission. That same year, the new WSU Extension Director, Stephen Bramwell, came on board, and we were immediately able to, as soon as he landed, we grabbed the Conservation District, the EDC and WSU, and we went out and did a producers' needs assessment. And we did many, sitting down with producers all across the county in multiple places, and listened to what they said their needs were and captured those, and WSU published that. document, and that's been part of, again, our marching orders over the years since then. You know, we are in service to the ag producer community. What are their needs? We're gonna fill those gaps. We're gonna try to provide them with what they need to be successful individually as viable businesses, and then as a region, as a sector, as an industry. So, and the agricultural park master planning, this was again some of the first funding that ever came to the ag park project, and it allowed us to then match and go after state funding and other funding. And so with that master planning funding, we also got some USDA grant. We got some state money that year, and we were off and running, and that's really what started it. And we would not have even started without the port's support. So you know, I can tell these stories, and I will throughout as we move forward in the slides. But I just want to point out that the port has been involved along the way. The food hub, you know, we were actually had a USDA grant to study food hubs, and we had formed a producer steering committee, and then COVID happened. And the producers were like, just do it. You know, we're not here to study it. We need new markets. They're closing the farmers markets. They're closing, you know, restaurants and institutions. And a lot of our markets are shutting down right now. We need new markets, you know, get started. And so the port provided an in-kind warehouse centrally located right in Tumwater off the freeway, right? We were serving a 5-county region within 3 months. So, so thank you. And I will say thank you many times throughout this. I guess I'm not going to go through that slowly. So this is just one of the many projects, but I just wanted to hit on it quickly to show you the port helped WSU with some money to do the research, then helped with some money to pay for some just select 3 different pieces of equipment, like a peeler and a dicer. The port was trying to figure it out at that time. We don't really are not in the business of owning small scale agricultural equipment, but the conservation district, and they rent it out all the time. So the port partnered with the EDC and WSU, and then the conservation district ended up owning it. They still have that equipment that they can lease out to other users. The Olympia School District partnered to open up their kitchen for this pilot project, put in some extra electrical work, and the project happened at the school kitchen. We got funding from the federal government for labor for a year, or part of a year. And then I think I got one more on there. So the food hub did the actual picking up of the deliveries. And then we had a grant from WSDA to do farm to school. So to get this food to school children. So it's just simple things like shredding your carrots and bagging them. A lot of school kitchens don't have central operating kitchens anymore. They can't make their own food anymore. They're taking pre-prepared food and just warming it up for children, right? Some school districts still have full kitchens, and that's awesome, but not all of them do. And so we found that there was this gap, that if we could just do cube sweet potatoes and vacuum pack them, that went a long way, that the schools could then purchase those things and they could utilize those things. Frozen berries, things of that nature that they could then have in their freezer and use throughout the winter season and things of that nature. And so again, port was the first one in, but so many different partners at the table to make things like this work. So another one is the Southwest Washington Growers Cooperatives Grain Project. Again, port was one of the first funders. WSU did a couple of years of trials, one in Grays Harbor, one in Lewis, learning what varieties grew best in the region. And this was specifically, the farmers had come to us and said, we have lost our main markets. They were selling Great Western down in Chehalis, which is a large frozen food facility, peas and corns and carrots and things of that nature. And they stopped taking contracts with the actual growers in their valley. They're still in operation. They ship all their produce over from Eastern Washington. They stopped sourcing from the Chehalis Valley. And there's multi-generational farmers that were selling into that facility. They were like, we don't have a market. And they came to the grains conference that year, and they were like, could grains be it? We've done grain before. You know, working with our partners, NABC went out and got a first contract with Great Western Malting down in Vancouver for the grains to go into beer. We were able to get some 09 funds from Lewis County, put in a rail spur. The port donated some land, and we were up and running in a year. And if you look at, I know this is kind of not the greatest graphic here, but if you look at the acreage, the first year it was just under 200 acres being grown. The next year, doubled that to 390. The next year, over 1,000 acres under cultivation. And so, this last year, we were like close to $1 million in producer payments to the grain growers. So that feels good, like we're doing real communities, regional scale economic development, where we're hearing our producers and meeting their needs. We're also building supply chains. So, we're actually formed a co-op of growers to be able to have that, the power of them, united together. And then we were, able to get a rail spur. We got small scale equipment to be able to load the grain onto the rail spur. That came from a grant too. And now some bigger funds are coming through, and we just heard from our representative Glusenkamp Perez that the port just got 3.5 million in an EDA grant to finish this grain storage facility down there. So, and then along the way, the EDC helped with things like, Talking Cedar. We actually had them if any of you have been to our event every December at the Great Wolf Lodge, we bring different folks together and do breakout sessions. And I had a panel where I wanted some local buyers there with local growers and the intermediary process. And they all loved it so much, they actually shook hands and came out of there and ended up making a contract of 150 tons of grain that Talking Cedar bought that year, and they've been buying ever since. The following year, the war in Russia started, and suddenly our growers were getting really nice money for local grain because it was uncertain, right? And so that's another piece of it, right? This resiliency, the more we grow in our own region, the more resilient we are if there are disruptions in the world due to pandemics or wars, right? We need to grow more of our own food for our own consumption. And so that is an effort with local food. This little piece right here, 247,000 seems little against those other numbers, but this allows us to put in grain handling and storage equipment at the Tumwater Craft District, and the students at SPSCC will be able to be sourcing local grains from our local co-op of growers and making their beers and whiskeys and that with local grain. And so that was funding that the EDC got through the capital budget this last year. So those are just a couple of examples. I'm happy to stop and answer questions along the way, or we can do questions at the end. But all right. So thank you. You all are relative. I think almost everyone here is relatively new to the port. But this little strategic little pieces along the way has been awesome. And we've been able to build year after year because of it. So thank you. So I want to dig into the food hub and the ag park. So, we won't dig too deep, but just again, this is part of a growers cooperative. The growers cooperative started with the grain growers, but the grain growers specifically said, let's not call ourselves grain growers cooperative. Let's call us a growers cooperative. So they opened that door always with the intention that we could have different pools, what we call pools or business lines out of the co-op. So the same co-op was already established when the food hub came along, and we wanted to launch very quickly because of COVID. The grain growers are bring them on in. And so then there was a second pool of growers that formed with the food hub. We're talking that the next one may be around the meat industry. So one of the new applications that just got reviewed just this last week is the Evergreen State College farm is now going to sell into the food hub. And there's an active group there that wants the college to be sourcing more locally. Obviously, they have always been. They struggle with the Aramark and whatnot, but an interesting, again, the tie in locally. That part at the top, that is the mission, right? Provides marketing, aggregation, storage, distribution, and administrative service for its members. That's what the food hub, that's what a food hub is. That's what a food hub does. And so this is actually, it was at the port. That little picture there was at the port's warehouse. We really are sourcing from sometimes 5, 6 local, surrounding counties, bring the food in from all the different growers, we package and box them up, and then send them out to the buyers that, again, could be 5, 6 different counties that it's going out to. So this is just some, numbers related to the food hub. I'm not going to get into this too much, but just, I do want to get into some of these numbers about the school districts, so I'll talk about that a little bit more. But you know, just some of the numbers, again, pointing out Thurston, Lewis, Grace Harbor, Pacific, Mason, and Pierce counties.
Can I make a comment?
Yes,
I got to participate in the Food Hub CSA box, the pilot project, and then as a traditional consumer. And it is the best one I've ever been involved in. The quality, the variety, the ability to substitute if you don't know what to do with kohlrabi or whatever. It was outstanding. Like, it's restaurant quality.
thank you, Commissioner. And yeah, I was gonna give you a shout out, right? There. Yeah, I mean, when you see this food.
It's amazing.
It is like nothing. Like, this is the best of the best. These are mostly pretty small scale, a lot of them organic farms. And the quality of the food that is coming out is extraordinary. So when you match that up with schools, like, you know, my son went to Shelton and was eating pink slime. You know, I mean, like, to actually be able to get some really fresh food and look at some of these places. We're in Mossy Rock and Adna and PL, all the way out to South Bend. I mean, these are really, really rural school districts. Some of these are real rural school districts is a hard thing to say. And if you notice, so, you know, Thurston, Lewis, Oakville and Aberdeen is out into Grace Harbor, South Bend, Pacific, Pioneer is in Mason County, Franklin, Pierce is in Pierce County. So that's 6 different counties that this Food Hub is supplying school children right now, and that's extraordinary. The business drop sites, this is we really stole this. There's a Food Hub called Link out in Spokane, and this is one of their ideas that if you partner with a local business for a drop site, so this is when Commissioner Harding is saying that she got one through a wellness program. So this, I'll switch over to this one first. Wellness is an employer saying, I will provide this opportunity to our employees to get a weekly box of produce during the growing season, right? The drop site program is just partnering with, so anyone, any individual could sign up for a weekly box like a CSA, if you're familiar with CSA, but we partner with a local business as a drop site with the idea that it helps that business also draw some attention. I'm gonna fill up my growler with beer when I go in to pick up my box of food, right? And so then we are also utilizing their social media, like, well, 80 as an example is fantastic with social media. They're marketing our Food Hub for us, right? So it's a great partnership to have these local businesses partner with us. And then the wellness program, a woman named Marilyn Sideker that was with Evergreen State College, now does part-time work at WSU. She just has a passion for the wellness, and she has made that, you know, she's very much a data geek, and she's gathering all the data on what, you know, the importance of food and how that actually can reduce your claims, insurance claims for your employees and things of that nature. And so anyways, the port did participate as one of the originals. And the first time we tried it out, it was last minute and we did not get a lot of people to participate, but it helped us launch again. So, and you always come back. So that's my Food Hub. You want me to pause there? All right, moving forward. So the agricultural park is definitely my baby. I have been working on that for too many years to mention. It is, you know, the vision is value-added food manufacturing, processing, storage, packaging, distribution. But it's also really intended to be an agricultural, you know, tourism, right? Ag tourism destination, you know, and I will get into everything here, but it's also going to have a component, you know, to just give the EDC its own little shout out. We have the highest concentration of business technical services under one roof in the state of Washington. So right here in Lacey, we offer more business startup support, scale-up support. We have a Washington Center for Women in Business specifically to help women in business. We have a procurement technical assistance center that helps businesses get contracts with the government. DC, we have so many ways that we can help businesses. And so part of this Ag Park project is to embed those services in a rural population. And so we will have a very small office, but there's also lots of common space to be utilized. And we will provide those services, not just to the businesses at the location or agricultural businesses, but any business in rural South County, in Lewis County. So that's part of it as well. So if you are in any way familiar with Tenino, the city is right up here. That's Highway 99, old Highway 99 that heads up, turns into Capitol Boulevard and ends right here. So really, it's gonna start at the farmer's market and end at the, well, sort of at the agricultural park. But this is also dead center on the Bountiful Byway, Thurston's agritourism loop. So as you're coming out of town, right as the world opens up on these beautiful prairie lands, Colvin Ranch on your left-hand side, it used to be Alpacas of America on the right-hand side, but some amazing things are happening now on that property. There's Miles Sand and Gravel is right here. That's where the agricultural park is located. It's owned by the city of Tenino. It's about 20 acres. You know, the wastewater treatment plant is also on that property. We just subdivided it last year. And so let's look at some of that. So right now, these north building and south building, that's going up right now. Both buildings are, the north building's a little bit further ahead. They're working on the the inner guts, the mechanical HVAC and things of that nature. The south building is still erecting some of the steel. You can see around it, there's gonna be a really nice public plaza space with sitting walls, and there will be some outdoor AV, so there can be, we really want it to be a gathering place for the community. The north building, I guess I'll get into the tenants in a minute, but the north building will have an event and training center in it. But also at the same time, so that's actually considered lot 2 as the wastewater treatment plant is lot 1. But lot 3, where future building B is located, and lot 4, where future building C are also under development right now. And so when we open at the end of the summer, you'll have 2 buildings with 5 tenants and then 3 lots developed. And so these 2 additional lots will be available, and we're always trying to recruit tenants and builders along the way. So in that north building, Simply Organics Cafe and Catering, a gentleman named Bryce Hughes. If anyone's ever been to Gather Gastropub out in Yelm, that was Bryce's business. 100% committed to local food and just kind of a pampered chef, kind of, this lettuce is not good enough for me. He actually, one of his first businesses, he's an incredible entrepreneur. One of his first businesses is he had a food truck in the Microsoft parking lot selling Colvin Ranch hamburgers for like $20. 20 years ago when you didn't pay $20 for a hamburger. He saw that market, that you focus on local food and high quality ingredients, and at least people with money would pay for it. And so he is going to have a restaurant, a little cafe, and a catering business. He sells in, he makes soups and salads and sandwiches and sauces and sells into Costco, sells to food co-ops. But he will also manage the event center component of the space. It's also been part of the vision that there would be these training spaces for WSU Extension or the Conservation District or anyone to use to do trainings there as well. The south building is privately owned. The business is named Dragon Wheel Investment Group. The gentleman there, his name is Perry Shea. If you know SCJ Alliance, a local engineering firm, he is the S, the Shea, and SCJ Alliance. He has divested from that, his engineering firm, which became quite successful. And now he is doing a couple of things, but one of them is investments. So the fact that little town of Tenino with less than 2,000 people will have an investment company there with that's actually gathering funds for projects. But he's focusing on gondolas. So they actually are building gondolas around the world right now. He's actually doing one in Colorado that has an opening coming up this month. And so they are these premier designer of aerial transport systems, which, again, for a little tiny town of Tenino, that's a pretty extraordinary thing to hang your hat on. Not agricultural though. So I do point that out, that my job is agriculture here in this, but he was the investor, so he gets to have a space in the building. Colvin Ranch, obviously directly next door. This part of the property where the ag park's going was Aunt Ethel's part of the Colvin property. It was all of the Colvin's property at one time. So it's a really great story for them to come full circle. It may be that the Colvins end up actually doing a meat processing piece on the further back part of the park. That's still open to other businesses that may bid or be interested in that. But we love the idea of the world's shortest supply chain, right? So that we could actually grow on the same prairie next door, process, and actually have a meat counter and a restaurant that could be serving you the food right there, right? I want to get in the Guinness Book of World Records. Hot Babes Hot Sauce. I don't know if that's a familiar name, but they sell right here at the farmer's market. They have utilized every service the EDC has. They've worked with our Washington Center for Women in Business. They've gone through our Scale Up program. And so we really are considering that like a food manufacturer incubator space. We're giving them below market rate rent. We're wrapping them with business support services and really trying to help they've been in business several years and they're growing. And we really feel like this is an opportunity for them to really grow their production capabilities. And again, that satellite CDNI of the EDC. So that is the first two buildings of the agricultural park. Okay, so no questions. All right, so what's next? So this is just artist rendering. That's that little plaza space that's up towards the old Highway 99. Again, this is seen from Highway 99. This is the stormwater retention area, but it creates a nice little, stage kind of effect. All right, so the plan is to be open by Labor Day. So I've been really shy of saying dates after I was wrong for so long. But at this point, we actually have, we have contractors under contract and they pretty much have to be done by that date. So this is just a different way to actually see those lots. Lot 2 is the active lot where the two buildings are going up, but lot 3 and 4 will also be done and ready at that time. And really, if we continue to, are able to secure more public funding that will be owned by the city, just like this the north building in the first lot. But we are also very happy to follow that port model of the public sector puts in the infrastructure and the private sector comes in and develops the property. So we're really open to either of those things. Partly my job is just constantly looking for potential tenants. We really moved forward with lot 2 with almost entirely different tenants that ended up there, but having that interest from the tenants helped us move forward. And we, started designing buildings and started taking those steps. And then some of the tenants shifted along the way. But having the tenants, we could not have moved forward without having tenants secured. So again, meat processing facility is the intention for the southernmost lot, lot 5. Lot 5 isn't even subdivided yet, and so we still have the ability to play around with the size of that lot. But right now, that whole bottom part that's not developed is lot 5. This is undeniably the number one, since I got to my job, and even before I was in my job, the number one thing I've been hearing from our producer community is that we need meat processing, that we just do not have capacity in the region. Growers are having to send their animals to Oregon or Eastern Washington to get processed, and then that increases costs and time. And so we're not looking at some giant brick and mortar, factory kind of. We're looking at maybe maximum capacity is maybe 15 head of cattle a day. This model right here is with a company called Friesla, and it's basically like large shipping containers, and each one is like a Lego. You can add different pieces, the harvest unit with the cooling unit with the cut and wrap with your cooler space, and you could add different pieces on as the operation grows. And so that's what we're looking at right now. We are looking for funds right now for a feasibility study for the site needs. But we are ready to move forward with this, just kind of looking for some funding. We just passed, actually tomorrow night, we'll officially pass a code change for the city of Tenino that allows this usage on the property. And so this is moving forward. Commissioner Mejia at the county is a huge champion of this project and has been from the onset. She has really been the motivation for a lot of the work that's gone on in the whole region. She really inspired the EDC and WSU to reach out and find out everything we possibly could, which led to a joint study with Pierce and Thurston to do what is the gap in meat processing. We already knew it, but now we have a fresh new report that says it. So she just encouraged us to seek funding at the federal level. Just wrote my first request to our senators 2 weeks ago. But anyways, this is the next piece moving forward. And obviously, when it's an agricultural park, having a signature agricultural usage is pretty important. So I have a couple extra slides I'd like to talk about, but that is the main meat and potatoes of my presentation, and I'm happy to pause and answer questions.
Any questions or comments? I'll ask a quick question on the food hub. You said, I think you said there's 20 members of the cooperative.
Yes.
All right.
So there's actually now, I think there's 21 now.
Okay.
Like in preparing these slides, one of them went through and there's another one that's under review. But yes, but that's just for the food hub side. So then there's the grain grower side. There's over 30 all told in the co-op.
So are those all traditional growers? Like you said, organic, but are there any like alternative, like indoor growing operations or anything like that? I asked because I know probably mostly before COVID, I know I was approached with a lot of opportunities for that alternative vegetable growing, crop growing indoors and that sort of thing. So I don't know, is there anything like that around here or?
Yeah, I mean, there is stuff like that around here in Lacey, you know, a couple of the vertical growers that
Yeah.
are all 100% indoor. I know one approached the food hub and was going through the application process. I think they even went through, but I don't think they ever performed. And so I'd have to go back and answer that question for you. I mean, as far as traditional growers, the grain growers are your traditional 5 generations. They can grow anything. You know, they grew up on the farm. They're not necessarily believers and, you know, they resist organic and salmon safe and stuff, but they're not really resisting that hard. The food hub side tends to be more of the evergreen graduates who put down roots and started small farms. And, you know, some of our signature ones that, you know, from the, you know, farmers market like Kersop Farms and people like that. I know that we had one that was doing the indoor vertical. I don't know how far they got in the process. I don't hear much about them these days. Yeah.
All right, and then the meat processing, you said it wouldn't be an expansive, but maybe 15 head a day. And you say you had a market study done. So I guess there's that number would be, it seems to me like that might be a little aggressive, maybe just getting started, because I think a lot of farmers, especially those who raise cattle are, you know, I think they've gotten used to the idea that they, you know, harvesting their product and going clear to Oregon or Eastern Washington. So they've sized their operation to you know, to deal with that. So
I'm saying the facility we're looking at right now would be a maximum of 15. You know, the business, whoever ends up doing this business, they will have to size that out. You know, we're working with them on a business plan with possibilities. We're looking at different models. But the truth it is we can grow.
yeah.
I mean, we have so many ranches in the area and they are willing to raise larger herds. They're limited by the capacity of the processing facilities. So we could significantly increase if we had a more functioning system in the region. And if you just drive out, God, I was driving out in the like Vail cutoff area of Yelm the other day. I mean, all throughout this county, there's people with just, you know, small 5, 10 head, whatever. I mean, and this is the kind of facility for those as well, right? I mean, we're not looking at a giant feedlot kind of size, but there is interest, and that's just Thurston County. Every county around us wants this, right? And they'd be happy for it to be in Thurston County. I mean, people would come from, you know, up the peninsula and from further south and from Pierce County and all over. So this is a need, and yeah, it's always scary for me as in, you know, in business support services, right? Like you don't want a business to start up and not be successful, right? So I'm with you on this, but I don't think there's any pressure for them to scale too quickly. So
Good.
on the food hub, I am gonna pass out this one sheeter, and there's plenty here for everyone, I think. Is there any other questions?
I just have a comment. I drive by the Ag Innovation Park almost every other day, and it's just amazing to see the progress going on in Tenino. And I appreciate, you know, being able to see, you know, that support in the rural county, South County. Really exciting.
That is right.
Yeah, I drove by a couple weeks ago. It's looking amazing.
I have to say, I've never, ever in my entire life been excited by paving before. But I was out there like, oh my God, I have a parking lot and all this Scotch broom and like, you know. Commissioner Vasavada,
I'm struggling a little with my screen. Can you hear me?
yes,
We can hear you.
I just wanted to thank you. I've taken a note of the shortest supply chain because I think ports, the public ports of Washington, which were probably established at first so that for our economy, so that we could move goods abroad and locally. I think there's an evolution where right now, the more we can do to support short supply chains, the better it is for the resilience of our local economy. So thank you for your briefing, and I hope we continue to be partners in this kind of work.
thank you. I have a feeling we will be.
Yes.
So, yeah, go ahead. Yes, please.
Well, sort of, I think I'm going the same place you are. So
Okay.
not having done this before, we have a contract annually with the EDC and just curious, how much of that contract negotiation involves us identifying sort of aspects of the work that you're doing that the port wants to support.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that whole list I mentioned earlier, so the EDC and the port have always had a contract much longer than I've been at the EDC. And you know, a lot, I mean, the foreign trade zone was one of the things that was accomplished out of that, and many things over the years. And so there's a real flexibility for the port to tell us what you want to use that contract for. The STEADY program, you know, has been supported out of that contract for years. All those projects that I mentioned before, none of that was used out of the EDC. That was, the EDC money was like a standing contract for staff to do work for the port. That was all, you know, funds. Oh God, I can't even think of like, what do you call your millage? Like you could up your 1 cent of a percentage of a penny or whatever. And that really inspired the commissioners one year. I can raise a penny and I can support $75,000 worth of ag projects, right? But we really were looking at our contract this year and it has gone to sleep. Can I please advance the slide? And we were gonna suggest, we have kind of suggested it, although I don't think Michael has actually gotten you
Nope,
his
not yet.
suggestion. But we were suggesting supporting the food hub this year as one possibility. So I think we have a meeting on the books that Mitzi just recently scheduled to talk it over, but we thought that it may interest you. Like I sent out I just passed that piece around, and if you see the kinds of work the food hub's doing, it is both economic development, but there's also a very strong social purpose component to it. It seems to maybe match the values. I mean, that's a large part of the EDC's mission, is to match the values of the people who live and work and play in Thurston County. And so that's up for discussion. If you want to use the money that's actually going to go to the EDC, Tina Sharp, who runs the food hub, you know, we had a grant that has supported her efforts through the USDA, a local food promotion program grant, and that money's out. So right now the EDC is supporting Tina just out of the belief in this work, right? There's no designated funding to support her position. If the port wanted to pitch in, it would be like coming full circle. You help support my position in the beginning. I think, you know, one of the fun things that I've always wanted to do, and I've talked to Tabor and I've talked to Camille about this, right? Is that you guys get hit all the time in the papers and in the media and for all the bad things in the ports, you know, like, let's tell the good stories. You know, you're supporting school children to get local food. Like we would love to tell stories together and like tell how the port is supporting these efforts in local food supply chains and supporting students. And we have lots of partners that can help us tell these stories. When we first launched the grain project, the EDC, the port, and WSU used Thurston Talk Stories to tell the story from each of our perspectives of how we were all involved in the grain project. And then we linked all those stories together. So when you read one story, it would go, oh, check out this other story. And it was like, oh, it's just, you know, and then a couple of years ago, Experience Olympia Beyond took up that story, thought it was a great story. And then they pushed it out far beyond just our local media. I mean, there's great stories to be told. And I think it would be a great way for us to partner. So. All right. Anything else? Well, thanks for having me here. It's really nice to be back and it's nice to.
Appreciate it.
Am I allowed to stick around or am I?
Yeah, you can stick around.
not stick- Oh, I got the clicker.
All right, well, thank you, Aslan. That was a very detailed and comprehensive presentation. We appreciate that very much, and we appreciate the relationship with the Thurston Economic Development Council. Next on the agenda is Bud Inlet's priorities and financial policy review. John Gilbertson, Director of Environmental Planning and Programs. You have the floor.
Righty, thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. Sean Gilbertson. As Commissioner I all said, I'm Sean Gilbertson, Director of Environmental Planning and Programs here at the Port of Olympia. And I'm pleased today to present you with a Bud Inlet update and to talk about some short-term funding needs that we have for the project. See, right, success. All right, what I'll be talking about today is a brief project history, kind of talk about how we got to where we're at today. We'll talk about the agreed order, which is basically the Department of Ecology. It houses our requirements from the Department of Ecology to assess and clean up Bud Inlet. We'll talk about current actions that are ongoing and will be happening soon, current funding needs, and then we'll talk about some funding opportunities to keep the project moving. Please feel free to interrupt at any time. It won't be interrupting. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them as I go. Thank you. Okay. Okay. All right. I think this project is uniquely situated to hit on all of the three main focus areas of the Port's mission. And by completing this major environmental remediation project, it really shows a commitment to environmental stewardship. As well, this remediation work will continue to allow the port to provide great economic opportunities around the Port Peninsula. And hopefully as a result of the work and associated work, it will also create better community places and community assets. So we're really excited about the prospects of this project. So in order to know where we're going, it helps to understand how we got here. And this is a picture of the Port Peninsula from the late 40s, 1940s. And this is looking west-southwest. You can see West Bay there in the distance. And you can see that it was very different Port Peninsula back in the 1940s. It was predominated by wood treatment, wood handling, wood processing facilities. And as a result of all that industrial activity, there was contamination that was released into the sediments of Bud Inlet. And that's what we're working hard to remediate. Now, if you fast forward to a more modern picture, one, there's color, which is amazing, but it has really turned into a great destination. It's a hub. You have a farmer's market there. You have new mixed use and residential and a lot of development potential and public use potential. One thing that has not changed is the fact that there's a lot of contamination in the Bud Inlet sediments, and that's what we're working hard to remedy. Oh, little misalignment there. I want to talk about what's called an agreed order, and that is an order from the Department of Ecology with the Port of Olympia to take an action of some sort. In this case, it is to originally, in around 2006, the port wanted to dredge sediments from the marine terminal berth. And in the due diligence process for that, they realized there was contaminated sediments next to the marine terminal berth. And of course, we had to notify the Department of Ecology about this, and they began their investigation in 2007. And they concluded that the contamination in the sediments was further reaching than initially thought. In 2012 and 2023, the agreed order was amended. And essentially what it did was it created the current requirements, which are for us to determine where and how much contamination is in Bud Inlet. We have to identify the potential sources of contamination within Bud Inlet. We need to analyze cleanup options, once we identify where and how much contamination there is, and we need to draft an interim action plan. These are all housed within the agreed order, which is a legally binding agreement with Department of Ecology. So we have our marching orders from the Department of Ecology, and that's just a picture of the front of the agreed order. So this is all part of what's called the Model Toxics Control Act process, or MOTCA, you've probably heard before. And this Bud Inlet is a MOTCA site. It's a contaminated site under Washington state law. And you can think of MOTCA as the state version of Superfund. So they're both used to address contaminated sites. In the MOTCA site, we deal with the Department of Ecology at the state level, which is convenient. They're local. Makes for maybe smoother operation as opposed to working with the Environmental Protection Agency if it was a Superfund site. So we're glad it's a state MOTCA site at this point, and we want to keep it that way. In short, MOTCA requires the investigation of a potential contaminated site. It requires a feasibility analysis to determine what options there are for remediating the contamination, removing it or capping it, protecting it. And it requires a feasibility study to determine what is the best option. It presents options and we basically pick one with which we then move forward with the cleanup action plan and to the cleanup and construction phase. So we're still in the early part of this, in the remedial investigation phase. There's a lot of reloading in the MOTCA process. You really have to do a lot of upfront planning and permitting and design to even determine what's there in order to then move forward with the cleanup action plan. So what chemicals are we really concerned about? The agreed order lists the chemicals shown up there on the screen, dioxins and furans. They're some of the first chemicals that were discovered in Bud Inlet, and they're really byproducts of burning wood. So there's a lot of wood burning that went on down here, and wood burning is done offsite as well and can be deposited by the atmosphere. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs, sometimes CPAHs, carcinogenic PAHs. They're also the result of wood burning as well as burning fossil fuels. So common activities, especially back in the early days before robust environmental rules. We're also looking for heavy metals, mercury, lead, chromium, cadmium, arsenic, that often were released as part of industrial activities or spills even. And then lastly, as part of the agreed order, pentachlorophenol is one that we're also testing for in our ongoing investigation, and that is a wood treatment preservative. So that was used for treating wood. And then in addition to the chemicals listed in the agreed order, we're also looking for contaminants found in stormwater runoff. You may not know that there are over 18 stormwater outfalls that discharge into Bud Inlet. So we have a lot of water coming in from dispersed areas around the Port Peninsula and around Bud Inlet. So we want to make sure that we identify all the sources of pollution, and then we also, knowing what was maybe being deposited from the stormwater runoff might help us prevent recontamination in the future. So it's a really important step for us during the investigation process. This map up here shows kind of the preliminary estimate of where contamination is in Bud Inlet. This was based off a pretty limited sample size. You can see some of the sample points scattered throughout both East and West Bay, but they really don't cover the entire Port Peninsula or the entire Bud Inlet. So what we're doing now is the investigation, which will expand all of the sampling that you see up there to be more of a grid pattern and to points to the north. We're not really sure how far yet because it'll be based on what the samples come back as. If they're positive, they show contamination, we may have to go a little further. So we want to go to the extent of the contamination. But as we get the results in from the investigatory work, this map will change and we'll have updated maps for everybody. And just an update on that, we have completed the sampling event in East Bay, which included over 100 sample locations. And we're looking to move the sampling and the investigation work into West Bay, which is what I'll be talking a little bit more about. So once we identify how much contamination is in the sediment, so where it is and how contaminated it is, we'll have, oh, sorry. Thank you, John. We'll have options for remediation. And basically three main options, dredging, which I think most people are familiar with. It's really getting in there and removing the contaminated sediment and pulling it out of the water. The second option is capping. You would cap with clean sediments in areas where maybe the depth of or the height of sediment overall isn't as important. You can cap contaminated material with clean sediment, thereby preventing its exposure to the environment or the people. And then the third option is enhanced natural recovery. And in certain areas, if the potential for human contact or environmental damage is low enough, those areas can be left alone in hopes that biological processes will naturally remediate on some of the contaminants. They can be tough with some of the contaminants that are listed in this agreed order. They're sometimes called forever chemicals, so some of them don't break down as readily as others. But that would be something we would endeavor and then monitor as we went along to see how effective it was. So what can be done with dredged sediment? There are pretty much three options for this as well. One is open water disposal. Open water disposal is the disposal of clean sediment. This would only apply to sediment that is relatively clean. It meets sediment criteria for open water disposal. And there are state, federal sanctioned areas in the Puget Sound where clean sediment can be deposited legally. The second option would be disposal in a landfill. And this is certainly the most costly option. And a lot of that is because of the transportation costs. It costs a lot of money to move sediment around and ship it to wherever it may need to be disposed in a landfill. And the third option would be upland beneficial use. And kind of in the background there, you can see what is the Baki Bowl. And that was some contaminated sediment that was placed upland, contained with sheet piles and other containment and capped so that contamination cannot go anywhere. What that allows is upland beneficial uses that can be used for public spaces and further development, or as I mentioned up there, address sea level rise. So when we need to build the Port Peninsula up to resiliency against sea level rise, we could place some of that sediment up on the peninsula and cap it, thereby helping us in our resiliency efforts. So those are the main options for sediment disposal. Thought I'd revisit the timeline here. I think many of you have seen this. I thought I'd step through it real quick. The red or salmon colored boxes up there, those are all ongoing. A lot of them are currently running, and they include the remedial investigation, design and permitting, sediment sampling, and then assessing interim remedies and drafting a cleanup action plan. And these are shown concurrently because as we're permitting and planning for the sampling in West Bay, for instance, we're already finished with the sediment sampling in East Bay and we're doing the laboratory analysis. So these are going to overlap a little bit as we move forward. I guess the most important thing is we're targeting a completion to the investigation phase near the end of 2026. So we still have 2.5 years to go in the investigation phase. And then immediately following that, when we have an approved cleanup action plan, we go into the actual cleanup and construction phase. And these would be done most likely starting in East Bay, moving to West Bay, and then to the north. That would be slightly determined by what we find in the investigation. But what you can see up there is that this is going to last a solid 4 years for the actual construction and the remedy part of this project. And at the very end there, you can see dam removal. That's the estimated, the earliest this dam could be removed for the Deschutes Estuary project. And it's really important for us to have completed our bud inlet remediation work before they remove the dam. What we don't want is for, even if it's clean sediment coming from Capitol Lake, we don't want that coming in and overtopping sediment that we need to remove. So we feel like we're up against the clock a little bit, but we're humming on all cylinders right now, so the outlook is good. As you can see down below, the green just indicates that throughout all processes, we are looking for funding. And we're currently still trying to secure design funding for the investigation to finish that up. And then we're also already working and forming partnerships and speaking with legislators and looking for grant money and appropriations for the construction side of things. We've been told by some that we're still a little far out actually to have enough definition to be awarded construction funding, but we're going to keep working, forming the partnerships and make sure that we're ready to ask for that funding when the time is right. So the funding is often been referred to as a capital stack, and capital stack really, as you can see in that table there, this is a depiction of the different possible funding sources for a project. And these are funding sources that would be utilized for all three phases. And I put the third phase of operations and maintenance because that's going to be a real ongoing expense for the port after the completion of the remedy. And you'll see in what's the capital stack listed there on the right is we're looking for federal grants and appropriations, state grants and appropriations, could be possible third party, potentially liable party. They could end up helping to fund this. It could be privately funded or public-private partnerships could be a part of that. Insurance recovery is an effort we're still working on and assessing right now. And then port revenue, which has been used for some of this work to date.
Sean, when we had a presentation on this, I think it was last year,
Mhm.
the likelihood of federal grants was very small. And so they said it wasn't a reliable funding source. Has that changed or do you think that that's a viable funding source or?
Thanks, Commissioner. I do believe it's a viable funding source, and it's certainly one we're going to pursue. I think for the investigation phase, it didn't really seem to pan out. We relied more on state funding, but certainly we are going into the approaching construction phase with our eye on federal funding for sure.
And I'll add in there, I think typically or historically, it's been harder to get funding. It's the pure cleanup side of things. But I think what we'd love to do is sort of combine the cleanup with redevelopment and resilience opportunities on the Port Peninsula. And there's more likely to be grant funding for that kind of work, so.
And I think there are several federal opportunities right now with the EPA and their Clean Ports program that we should be looking into because they are funding things like this.
Yeah.
For the ongoing operations maintenance side more than, market cleanup. So we could combine the two.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, and also there could be, as Alex was pointing out, there could be habitat restoration combined in that, which would also elevate our chances of getting funding. We're certainly looking into that and all the grant opportunities that Commissioner Tung mentioned. We're looking into those, and we have a grant consultant helping us scour the news lines to see, make sure that we're not missing out on any opportunities. This is a little bit of a complicated couple tables here, but I really wanted to try to get to the meat of the funding for the investigation, planning, and design phase. The top table up there shows that the total estimate for all of the investigatory work is $22 million. That's a stiff price tag. I mean, I think many people have sticker shock when they see that. It includes all of the planning, design, permitting, field work that's included, all the laboratory analysis, the associated coordination with the Department of Ecology, a lot of back and forths, And we pay for the Department of Ecology's work too on this. And then it also includes, sorry, lost my train of thought. Basically, all of the reports that will be due, including ecology coordination on producing those reports. It's really a collaboration, I will say, with the Department of Ecology. We propose something, they agree or disagree, we revise in hopes to getting to the point that they approve. So it's an iterative process with some of this, and there's a pretty steep price tag on it. So far, we've received we've received 2 ecology remedial action grants, and we've submitted an application for a third. Assuming that we get the third remedial action grant, we will have had a total ecology funding of $10.2 million, which would require a 1-to-1 match from the port. So that puts the port's responsibility at $10.2 million. As you can see, the 10.2 and 10.2 equals 20.4. So it leaves a gap of 1.6 above the grant funding altogether. So that's kind of a snapshot at the total budget for the investigation. If we go down to the port match part down below, as you can see, the port match requirement is 10.2 million. So far, we did receive a $2.2 million appropriation from the Department of Commerce it's being funneled through the Department of Commerce that is actually being used as a grant match. There's no match to the Commerce appropriation. So far, we've spent $3 million in port funds over the last few years and pushing this work forward. So that leaves a $5 million grant match that is still needed moving forward. That is in addition to the 1.6 million above. So we're still looking at about 6.6 million to get through the full investigation phase here and start moving towards the construction phase. Any questions on that? I know it's a bit much to look at. And with that, okay, thank you. So phase 1, investigation, planning, and design. Good news is we're currently ahead of schedule with the investigative work. We finished the consultant team and John here. I give a lot of credit to John, really finished the permitting process, and we're able to get out and conduct all of the field work much sooner than they originally thought. They originally thought that permitting would take longer and that we might be out in Butt Inlet in the sampling later this fall. We're able to get it done in the winter, which is a big deal. However, it moved so quickly that it outpaced the consultant predictions and our own predictions for how much funding we would need in 2024. We're ahead of schedule, and the actual cost of continuing the work this year exceeds what was budgeted in the 2024 budget. And that's a big reason why I'm here talking about this. We have a $2 million gap that we need to fill to match the ecology remedial action grant to continue the work going in 2024. Continuing the investigation work in 2024 is important. Lack of funding can stall the project, and that's not a good look. We've really worked hard in rebuilding our relationship with ecology, showing that that our grant performance, that we're going to spend the grant money, and that we're going to be very conscientious of our record keeping and seeking reimbursement. So our grant performance is really at a high right now. But if we stall the project, especially considering the fish windows, we're basically not able to get out there and do a lot of this work during the summertime, late spring, summer, early fall. So we'll basically be having to stall the project till, well, there's a little more to the story. If the project stalls right now, we would not likely be able to get the planning and design done for the West Bay investigation work until the beginning of 2025. Which would very likely push our field work in West Bay out until the end of 2025 or early 2026. If we're able to fill the funding gap now, it's very likely that we'll be able to go ahead on, we'll finish the planning and design and permitting work which would allow the sampling to occur hopefully in late 2024 or early 2025. So we're looking at saving a year if we can continue the progress that we have going right now. As I mentioned, grant performance is heavily dependent on steady progress. And Ecology is noticed, I believe, and they are enthusiastic and supportive of our efforts to spend down our grant funding. The other thing is if we continue steady progress in the investigatory work and spend down our grant funding, it shows that we're worthy of receiving that third remedial action grant, which, as I mentioned, we have applied for that grant right now, and we want to keep doing the right thing and making great progress on the project. So in order to fill the gap that we have, the funding gap for 2024, there are some options, and they're relatively limited because of the short turnaround. But we're looking at port reserves, short-term financing, or real estate reinvestment fund expenditures. And I'm not advocating for any of these. I am just laying out the options. I had been asked about the real estate reinvestment fund. So I looked into the policy a little bit just to make sure I could answer those questions. And it does state the policy 1105 that real estate reinvestment proceeds can be used for environmental cleanups when the actual cost of the cleanups exceeds the estimated cost. So it seems to be a reasonable fit for where we're at in this process. And now we're just gonna, after that, we're just gonna zoom real quick to the longer term outlook. And this is for phase two, the construction aspect. I just want to touch base on it real quick. There are many variables yet to be determined that will affect the cost of construction and the remedy. A lot of it's going to be contingent on what our investigation unearths and the extent and nature of the contamination. The funding for construction and the remedy will require state and funding and federal funding. There's really no doubt about that. And all of the options in the capital stack are on the table right now. So we're assessing all of those options, working with our partners and our consultants to make sure that we can secure that funding to keep this project moving forward. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Does anybody have questions? Commissioner Basavita, I can't see you, but I'm assuming you're still there. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask Sean?
I am, and thank you. Sean, this is sort of a question to help address concerns. I've received so many emails from citizens who are concerned that we are thinking of how we're going to redevelop the waterfront before we've completed remediation of Bud Bay. And yet when I look at that capital stack, it seems to me, and also from experience I've heard from others in economic development, that it's often when you restore land to a specific beneficial use that you are able to do the fundraising for the remediation. Can you speak to this a little bit, kind of how development sometimes goes hand in hand with the cleanup efforts?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, that's a great point. And certainly what we want to do when we're seeking funding and we're working with our partners to seek funding at the state and federal level, and even private investors, we want to ensure that we are showing what is a multi-benefit project. So anytime we can include different elements such as what Alex mentioned, economic redevelopment or sea level rise resiliency or habitat restoration, all of those packaged together make a much more attractive project for which to seek funding. So absolutely, we're working on plans for that. And we do have to think a little bit ahead about what the future of the Port Peninsula could be to maximize those opportunities. So we're going to continue to do that. Thank you.
I have a comment. So when we went through the process of approving moving forward with this project, Maya Bellin gave a presentation on potential funding sources because that was one of our concerns is we wanted to make sure we were able to perform on the port's obligations to make sure this was moving forward. And in a best case scenario, there's a 10% match on the grant dollars that we're getting that she laid out, and it went from 10 to 50 depending on the grant. So best case scenario, 10% of a very large number, and having a plan of how the port was going to pay for that. And we got to a point of if you build it, they will come, and these grant dollars will appear. And I guess as we're looking at funding this $2 million, it would be helpful to me if we could look at how we intend. One of the things we talked about was the performance of our business lines and looking at whether there's additional revenue that we can anticipate from our business lines that could fund some of these efforts. If not, then what are our expectations as to how we're going to fund these ongoing obligations? Because it's $2 million right now, but it's another 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. So that would be helpful to me. I fundamentally don't believe the real estate reinvestment fund, even if it qualifies to the letter of the law. I think this is that would feel like a stretch at this stage, especially because we're at the investigation stage, to me personally. If we were further along and we had a plan for economic development and real estate, but the real estate reinvestment policy is intended to kind of put some fencing around those dollars so that they are used for real estate. Seems like a little bit of a stretch to me, but thank you for putting this together. I mean, I definitely would like to, we don't wanna stall the project, because this has been stalled before, and that just costs taxpayer dollars when we stop and start. We're building trust with our tribal and jurisdictional partners as well as ecology. So figuring out a way to move this forward, I think needs to be a priority, but the sustainability of the funding, it's still a gap in my mind.
I will say, Commissioner, just a couple thoughts. First is we will come back to you to do a budget amendment for the 2 million. So at that point, we will ask for a decision about the source of funds, and I understand your concerns about the real estate reinvestment fund. The second piece is I absolutely share your concern about funding. And right now with the agreed order that we have, the port is only committed sort of on the hook to do the work through the investigation phase and getting to a draft cleanup action plan. At that point, our obligations end financially and in terms of work. Before we sign on to an agreed order for the actual construction and cleanup, I would want to make sure that we've identified the funding sources. To that end, we're sort of getting the band back together, so to speak, with the consultant team that worked with Executive Director Gibney and Lisa Parks initially to start talking about these things, identifying it. We're gonna meet with them the day before we have our retreat with you all to sort of develop a plan, and especially with a priority on funding opportunities. So yeah, absolutely, it's a priority and a focus, and we'll come back to you with all that.
On the slide, you showed the 1.6 million, and down below was the 5 million match that what's the timeline on the 5 million?
Essentially, that is match dollars required before the agreed order is done,
Okay.
which we anticipate will be approximately the end of 2026. So it's 2.5 years approximately from now that we will need to come up with the 5 million for grant match, and then another 1.6 to round out the rest of the budget. So we're looking at about $6.6 million shortfall by the end of 2026.
And I will say, we did get the appropriation from Commerce last session. I think that's a priority. We've got a new state lobbyist to work with us because our current one's retiring, but that's a priority, is also to go talk to legislators about getting a similar appropriation to help with that amendment.
Commissioner Ayala, Commissioner Vasavia
Go ahead, Commissioner Basava.
To follow up a little bit on Commissioner Isles' question on timeline, what I heard, Sean, in your presentation was that in a way, work has gone faster, so it's not that we're at risk of losing a specific amount of money if we don't accelerate our match, but we'll slow down the work and we would lose sort of some confidence we've built with ecology. So on that note, I'm very supportive when this comes before us. I just want to flag, I think it's really important we don't slow down this work, but I do think we need that comprehensive, now that we've got TAD, that comprehensive look that Commissioner Harding is wanting is going to be really important before you come to us for this amendment, just so that everyone has the information we need to go fully forward.
Thank you.
Another question, you mentioned the 18 stormwater outfalls into Bud Inlet. Is there, what's being done to collect or treat any contaminants that might be in there? Is there anything being done?
There are things being done. For instance, City of Olympia is the owner of many of those outfalls, and they are continually working to implement tighter stormwater restrictions and try to do more source control within their municipality. But we're really not sure at this point the contribution from those outfalls. So in our current investigation work, we are centering some sample locations around those outfalls, so we get a better idea of what might be coming in. But certainly part of the remedy and the long-term viability of this project and a clean Bud Inlet is source control. So we'll be working with any of those jurisdictions that discharge the Bud Inlet to make sure we can tighten up stormwater treatment and stormwater control. So certainly it's a big concern of ours. And some of those outfalls probably come from treated stormwater streams and some are relatively untreated. So that's something that we're really going to be diving into as we get towards the second half of the investigation work.
Yeah, just once we get the investigation results, then we'll be better, we sort of be equipped to go and have conversations with some of our partners. And I might prime the, I'm gonna have breakfast with Jay Burney later this week. I will be priming the pump, but I do think that as we look at this cleanup as an opportunity, sort of re-envision the Port Peninsula and to do some real significant upgrades, amenities, resilience, habitat restoration, we might be able to get similar engagement from our local partners who may also be liable for the cleanup. And then collectively, I think we also have a better shot at grant funds if we're all in it together. So I think building those partnerships and sort of aligning on the vision of what we need is going to be super important.
All right, any other questions or comments? No? Well, thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Commissioners.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Any other questions, comments from the commission? Hearing nothing, I'll call this this work session adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aslan. Thank you, Sean.